I'm Ros Westwood. I'm the Derbyshire Museums Manager. I've been here for 25 years. And I'm referred to as Ros Westwood. Talk to me as Ros. And at some point, I'm quite sure the government would quite like the MBE put behind my name. And formally also, I'm a fellow of the Museums Association. Looks a bit like a wasteland. But it's one of those magical places in the middle of a town where a little bit of information and a little bit of imagination and you suddenly can go back in time. Because this is a site of archaeological importance. It's a scheduled monument. And the excavations in the 1980s found very, very early buildings there. And suggestions of population movements coming to the thermal waters probably of Buxton 5,000 years ago. And they continued to come and go until about 3,000 years ago. And you've got these shadows on the landscape of you and me and our families working out how to live. New technologies. We're talking 3,000 years. For most people, 3,000 years, that's the Iron Age to now.
Yeah.
So think about where technology's gone in that time. So you're coming in the footsteps, and in the footsteps of animals, because they're coming here, because all mammals need salt. And there would have been bears, and there would have been wolves, and there would have been frightening things around. But there was dinner. And there was medicine of a sort. So that's really early. And then you would have moved on, because you would have followed the herds of animals.
Why is it that these food groups, why are they so important for humanity, for our story and how it's being built?
We need dinner. Really, for humanity, the way we have developed right over time is we've developed as a top predator relying on meat. Now, the point of meat is that some other animal has processed the grass. That's why in Britain we have cows and sheep. They are processing the grass so that we can eat. If you can grow additional, you're not having to kill all your animals, then you're beginning to get surplus. But in order to do that, you have to start to settle, because things take time to grow. Now what we've got is big diasporas of communities coming in from the Middle East, as we would call it nowadays. Mesopotamia is what it was called when I was at school. Anatolia, also from the Iberian Peninsula. People are coming across, and the Beaker people in particular, bringing seeds in their pockets. Seeds that they know will grow and produce well. Because this is not a case of going down to the shop and buying a packet of whoever it is, his latest seeds with a pretty picture on the front cover. This is a case of learning how to manage your seed bank so that you can grow it. Also working out what plants you can actually eat, and bear in mind we've always been able to eat plants, that's part of the human condition. So we've always eaten things like herbs and fruit, and some we know are good for us and some we know, stay away from that, not good. Or it might be necessary today because something's gone wrong. So these people are coming in, and they're also, and this is the bit that I find really amazing, they're also bringing their animals. Now the land bridge between Europe and Britain has gone. So in order to bring your cow, your dog, your goat, your sheep, whatever, you have to put that in a boat and bring it. As well as your wife, we'll call her that, and your children. And you have to be pretty brave to do that. The world has not changed. If you are going to risk going over the sea with your children, you are going to be brave. The story is continuous, right over 6,000-7,000 years.
the Lismore field is just one field, but the history behind it is so expansive. We do know, but we may never account for just how much effort was put in, was made to actually make it so. But
people didn't see that as an effort any more than I would see it as an effort planting some carrots in my garden. They were living life. This is the bit to remember. We're looking at history. They're just living life. This is everyday life. Sun comes up. What am I going to do? I've got the children to look after. I've got we're now looking at about 3,500 years ago. I've got a goat to milk. The men might be away hunting. They might be sitting around knapping flints. So we've got tools. We've got to make baskets. We've got to go getting fish. So we've probably got nets for that. We could be making nets for other things. We have to have clothing. So we have to be able to look after the leathers that we've got from the deer. Hopefully I've brought with me the right salts in my leather bag so I can treat that fabric. Maybe that's why I've come for this water. I don't quite know all of the answers. Don't think people are wearing nasty, hard, crumpled, smelly clothes. They know how to work leather. These people know how to do things. We've forgotten. They were using the tools that they had to the best of their ability. So if you think of somebody, if you watch a TV program and somebody using a knife really well, you know that they've practiced, they've done it often. These people are exactly the same. They know the tool that they need to use. And that's the bit that you have to sit there and think, in the middle of this rather scrubby looking field, I'm actually hand in hand with these people. I'm possibly worrying that I haven't got any food for the winter, and one of the things they found was a building which looked like it had been a granary. There was the evidence of Emma wheat in it, and the archaeologists are suggesting that that could have actually been brought up from the Cheshire Plain, because we're very high here. It's not bad for growing, and the temperatures, it was a bit warmer then, so this was pretty good, but getting the ground was hard. And they were having to probably fell trees, hazel scrub, slash and burn, as it was called when I was at school. And then you plant a small garden, and you plant some seed, you harvest it, you take some for the bread, you retain some for next year. You know, this is normal life, and we just see it as, oh, I'm the first person in the world to have a baby. Actually, no. You're having a baby in a wonderful time in the 21st century compared to the fear that woman would have been feeling as she had that baby. Heaved a sigh of relief because she was going to actually probably breastfeed it for 2 years, which meant she didn't have another baby for a while and didn't put herself at that risk. She might not have any nights of sleep, but yeah. But maybe her husband would say, no, you've got to put the baby to a wet nurse. And then she's pregnant again. And all that fear of pregnancy. So life was the best they knew. And it was brilliant. And they would move on.
This is amazing. Will you tell me, and for our audience as well, could you clarify for us that this isn't the oldest site we know in the UK, it's just one of the oldest, just so that they know?
It is certainly one of the oldest. The start of continuous record of cereal protection, cereal type pollen, is dated to here from the 5th millennium, and it is certainly one of the earliest. It's certainly one of the oldest. We're looking at something like the 5th millennium, so we're looking at 6,000s. It's in the pollen record, and what they're finding in the pollen record is periods of scrub and then periods of grain pollen. So it's a continuous change. But we have to remember that this excavation was done in the 1980s. That's 40 years ago. There's been a huge amount of archaeology done since. But it still remains one of the earliest. And that's partly because it was an area which had not been disturbed. It's been a meadow for years. And so that these areas were relatively protected.
Surely this place was found because they built the estate, right? They were building, in my head I was like, they probably built the estate and accidentally found this.
It was a trial excavation because of a housing development, yes.
I'm wondering how that process happens, just for my own satisfaction. This is not for online, but just, does a builder find something and how do they know that's historical? How do they know
they don't.
What's...
If you want to put in a building development, you actually have to employ the archaeologists to go and test pit.
Fantastic.
And that's why, and you can put this into the film, that is why so much is being found at the present moment. One of the reasons that before you can build in this country, legislation came in the late 70s, the time it was called PPG 1516, I think it was. And you have to actually employ archaeologists to come and test pit to make sure that there is no archaeology. And so across the country, with these big building developments, a lot of the time, yes, we've sort of found half a dozen Mesolithic flints. How terribly exciting. But then there was a big one just there have been two down in the south of the country where they've actually discovered mastodon bones and huge numbers of animals. So
I heard that you have the oldest pot. Is that true? Or it was found in Lismore?
we have one of probably 20. There are about 20 old pots, and there was one found at Lismore. It's made of Grimston ware. We'll go up and have a look at it and get a photograph.
Yay!
You can see it. But even that pot is just amazing, because if you think about making a pot 6,000 years ago, you'd think, oh well, it's a pinch pot and it's all big and chunky. I think you might be surprised. And they discovered that it had been used for a sort of a milky, porridgey drink of some sort. And that in itself is interesting, because it sets the question, if you've got milk, whose milk? I prefer to think it was a goat or a sheep, which means that you've got an animal that is sufficiently domesticated for you to milk it. But also interesting, at the time, adult people weren't lactose tolerant. So to make a big bowl of something which looks a bit like a yogurty mess and then ask people to drink it makes you think, hang on, what the hell's going on here? And it's probably a celebration event, and we're going to pass the bowl around. I think it is just amazing that in a town where there is an awful lot of very high Victorian gardening and the legacy of that, and they all thought, oh well, we're at the very best of our times, we're the Victorians, there is this rather scruffy field where it doesn't seem that much happens, but actually it ties us right the way back to beyond the Romans, way back, and almost to that cave lion that came down and found the spring. And we originally, as hominids, not even people at the time, we wouldn't recognise ourselves, followed those lions, because if the lion was there, dinner was there, and I didn't have to kill it. I could just nick it. And I know that sounds awful, but life, humans and hominids require something for dinner, and we cannot live as vegetarians without all the additionality that comes in with a modern vegetarian, and we just would not have got strong enough. Our brains would not have developed, and that's what we needed. And the other thing to remember, that these were people, yes, they were living life, they were also telling stories. They had their beliefs, they had their imaginations, their fears. They looked up at the sky at night. There would have been a gazillion stars, none of which we can see now because there's too much light. But they would have looked at Orion. They would have seen the planets moving over. They knew when summer was, when winter was. They knew when to plant. You know, all of those things, these things remind us that we are the inheritors of a long line of people, and it's not just Granny and Grandpa and Great Granny. It's way, way back. And if we go on wrecking the place, then what does it matter? Matters to me. Matters to you. I can't change everybody.
Ros, this has been fantastic. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. You're yet to take me up to the pot, but I want to shake your hand now and say thank you. This is perfect. I'm just going to check through my questions and see if there's anything I missed out. Right. So, Ros, what have you taken me to see here?
So you're standing in front of a 10-metre long timeline, which stretches from a million years ago, and we've come almost to the furthest end, and we're about 6,000, 4,000 years ago. And the first item is 124. Those are some very early Mesolithic flints from about 10,000 years ago found on Tintwistle Moor, which isn't a million miles from here. And then these two objects, 126. This is one of the oldest pots in Britain. It's Grimston ware. It was found at Lismore Fields in pieces and is just the most amazing piece of pottery that you can imagine. I mean, if you saw that in a full size and looking gorgeous at a car boot sale, you'd buy it as a piece of studio pottery today. It's just the most amazing object. And then next to it at 127 are some of the flints that were found at Lismore Fields, including a really pretty little arrowhead and a thumb scraper. So we know that they're killing animals, but they also need tools to skin them, to flay the meat, to and all sorts of other things, probably used for shredding fibres to make baskets and things like that. But this particular bowl then went, after they'd found it, they sent it up to the archaeologists and some scientific work, early research work, which was being done in the 80s. And that's when they discovered what the pot was being used for. Mm. So this rather gloopy, yogurty, milky drink. And it's by taking these bits of non-organic archaeology, we can start to try and put together something of the lives of people. We have none of the organics. We do not know what they were wearing. We don't even know who these people were, because the geology there is not good enough for the retention of bone, which is surprising because if you look through this case, there's bone all over the place. So we haven't got anything about the real people who lived there, whether anybody died there. But what we do have is this evidence of life. And then if you look at, through very careful archaeology, sieving floors of what look like buildings, looking at potholes, looking at the contents, we know that they had sorted out seed and chaff. So they're threshing grain, which again is technological. Nowadays most people say, what does that, how do you do that? Oh, you use a tractor. Oh, yeah, well you had to do this by hand in those days, and the wind. And the chaff would have been fed to probably an animal, seed would have been used for making bread, making flour, pretty rough, pretty grainy stuff, but nice, flatbread probably, cooked on a fire. Nothing different. You know, behind you you can actually see what vegetable soup might have looked like. So we can actually get to grips with what people are eating, what dinner might have looked like, how long they stayed in this place at this time. So this is the Mesolithic. We're not sure, they must have moved on. But they come back because we know that they're in the Neolithic as well. Again, probably only short periods of time. And moving on. But the Peak District, particularly the White Peak, becomes a very, very busy place, and there are an awful lot of people here. And the evidence that we see is through all of these objects, the building of two huge henge monuments, Foxhole Cave, where we've got the oldest human remains, and we know that there were people there 12,000 years ago. So it's a place where people are coming and going, so there must be reason. And a lot of this must tie down to the headwaters of the Wye and these springs and this warm water. And it still is important in this town.
Fantastic.
Able to help with the gardening. It was called gardening rather than farming. You would see it as gardening. But you would have had people who were gathering the roots, they were sorting out, shedding the nuts, they were doing that. But there were people who were actually making art, as we would call it, decorating things, making jewellery. I don't believe this period was in black and white or brown. I think if you could find some feathers, you could put in your hair. If you could make some beads, as we know, we've got private beads from the Baltic. You would wear bright orange beads. You would find a way to make a hole in a stone to put it around your neck.
I can see if I was in one of these groups, I'd probably be doing something like that, or I'd be in the back making the cup and ring stones, like chiselling away, making rock art or something. I'd be doing that one of those.
You would be making baskets, because baskets are needed. Weaving. You would have been working out how to make a coat out of a piece of skin.
Oh yeah.
And it didn't.
Yeah.
You would have been sitting there thinking, how can I felt this wool? If I push it into the water, what's going to happen to it? If I put those herbs with that, do I get truffle wool? So now I've got a fancier coat. You know, if I make some holes here, can I put some threads through? And then I can tie those together, and now I've got something which is more like a coat, which is comfy. Can I make some bone tools? Learn how to sew. There are three great tools that were invented so long ago that we can't remember how it was done. One was the knife, which we use a metal one, they used a stone one. One was a pot, we still use pot ones. And one was an eagle. The person who invented an eagle needs to get a prize. Makes it so much easier than having to try and get that piece of something through the hole that I've made a hole with. I can pull the thread through.
So much easier. And of course the Peak District with Brindleford, the grinding of the, what do you call them?
The grindstones.
Yes, they're actually making these needles. And that's fantastic. You can see that all over the Peak District.
So, yeah, I think, I don't think that you would have found it completely useless. I don't think that's the case. I think as one gets older, one gets more skills. And therefore you probably at your age, you would have had 1, 2, 3 children. You would have been pretty busy bringing them up, making sure that they're not getting up to nonsense, making sure that they're learning which plants they can gather and there isn't time to play as such. So they might go chasing after a bumblebee, but you're having to watch why they're chasing after that bumblebee. They may be chasing after butterflies. They may be going up trees and collecting birds' eggs, which is very nice, thank you, because that's a source of food. No chickens in those days. Ducks, yes, no chickens. So, they are going, these children are going to be using play to learn, and their skills that they will always have. And you as mum would have been looking after all of that. But there would have been more people, your mum would have been there, she would have been keeping an eye, and she would have been saying to you, no, you don't do it that way. Do it this way. I've got this new tool. The argument would have been exactly the same.
I wonder, you know how you find, so new computers are coming out, and I find it really aggravating to sometimes to try and teach my mum how to use the internet, for example. She's like almost 70. But we won't put that on, but she's really great with the internet, but sometimes she pulls me over, and I find it so frustrating trying to teach her something that I have grown up with. And I wonder, that's probably exactly the same. That's happening back then with new technologies that they found. No, Mum, it's easy. It's an arrowhead. This is how these guys are using it. Can't you see? Well, we didn't have these a couple of years ago. How do you expect me to know what this is for?
Yes. I mean, and that is all part of what we're now learning, and what we're able to use is this understanding of how the brain has developed, and how the brain learns things, and how it captures information. And we can use all of this history to help us understand all of that. All of this history to help us understand why art, music, storytelling is absolutely essential in our lives. And none of us realised that, I don't think, until COVID. And suddenly, it seemed to stop. The live performance, the opportunity to make a sound. And you realise that this is as important as the guy who can make the tools, the limestone, whichever it is. The musicians, the storytellers were absolutely essential. And it goes right the way back through time. So if you get to listen, go and sit and feel and just try and imagine that person.
And that's what we're going to do now.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
That's a pleasure.
Can I shake your hand again? Thank you. That's really kind of you to I recognise that you've taken a big chunk out of your day for this. So
that's all right. It's good for me to remind myself on stories.
I'm very grateful.
Go and find out why the lights aren't working on that case, but we'll work on that.
I'll give you a message when that's done. I have a feeling, because you've said so many amazing things.
And then these two objects, 126. This is one of the oldest pots in Britain. It's Grimston ware. It was found at Lismore Fields in pieces, and is just the most amazing piece of pottery that you can imagine. I mean, if you saw that in a full size and looking gorgeous at a car boot sale, you'd buy it. As a piece of studio pottery today, it's just the most amazing object. And then next to it at 127 are some of the flints that were found at Lismore Fields, including a really pretty little arrowhead and a thumb scraper. So we know that they're killing animals, but they're also need tools to skin them, to flay the meat, to and all sorts of other things, probably used for shredding fibres to make baskets and things like that. But this particular bowl then went, after they'd found it, they sent it up to the archaeologists and some scientific work, early research work, which was being done in the 80s. And that's when they discovered what the pot was being used for. Mm-hmm. So this rather gloopy, yogurty, milky drink. And it's by taking these bits of non-organic archaeology, we can start to try and put together something of the lives of people. We have none of the organics. We do not know what they were wearing. We don't even know what who these people were, because the geology there is not good enough for the retention of bone. So we haven't got anything about the real people who lived there, whether anybody died there. But what we do have is this evidence of life. And then if you look at, through very careful archaeology, sieving floors of what look like buildings, looking at potholes, looking at the contents, we know that they had sorted out seed and chaff. So they're threshing grain, which again is technological. Nowadays most people will say, how do you do that? Oh, you use a tractor. Oh, yeah, well you had to do this by hand in those days, and the wind. And the chaff would have been fed to probably an animal. Seed would have been used for making bread, making flour. Pretty rough, pretty grainy stuff, but nice. Flatbread probably, cooked on a fire. Nothing different. Behind you can actually see what vegetable soup might have looked like. So we can actually get to grips with what people are eating, what dinner might have looked like, how long they stayed in this place at this time. So this is the Mesolithic. We're not sure. They must have moved on. But they come back, because we know they're there in the Neolithic as well. Again, probably only short periods of time, and moving on. But the Peak District, particularly the White Peak, becomes a very, very busy place, and there are an awful lot of people here. And the evidence that we see is through all of these objects, the building of two huge henge monuments, Foxhole Cave, where we've got the oldest human remains, and we know that there were people there 12,000 years ago. So it's a place where people are coming and going, so there must be reason. And a lot of this must tie down to the headwaters of the Wye and these springs and this warm water. And it still is important in this town.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. We'll get some more close-up shots of this. But this is beautiful. This is so intact. And for one of the oldest pots in the UK forever found, that is way more intact than you could have ever told me. I would never believe.
Well, it is all glued together.
It is, but even then, there's so much of it, and because you normally find little fragments, don't you? You don't find so much.
And I was saying that later pottery looks like flapjack, and look at it.
Oh yes.
This is Peterborough ware. This is later. Oh, newer. Let's put it.
Was this also found in Lismore Fields?
No.
Oh, okay.
This is I think Foxhole.
Oh, Foxhole.
Little axe head from Foxhole, and the earliest human remains to be found in Derbyshire.
Do you find a lot of things in caves?
Yes. Our cave collections are huge. All of that lot comes out of caves.
Wow. Because I'm a caver, and I normally find loads of bones, and because animals just get lost in caves a lot, so we find lots of bones, but it makes me wonder if I've passed anything that could be of more significance.
You have.
Do you reckon?
5,000 specimens came out of Elderbush Cave.
Oh right.
Including, by the time they'd finished, the whole of a giant deer. We've got cave lion remains. We've got hyena, mastodon, wolves, bears. My lovely bear down there. One of 3 or 4 bear skulls we've got. And the earliest mammal remains, they didn't come out of a cave, they came out of a hole though, which are the mastodon teeth, the scimitar-toothed cats.
All these gadgets that they're using to live their life, but where are they living? What does Lismore Field look like where they're going into these houses? Can we call them houses? What's going on here?
We know that there's evidence of buildings. So they're potholes in the archaeology, post holes.
Post holes.
So clearly somebody is building something. Now whether they are big communal properties or whether, I don't think they are nuclear family, Granny's going to live on their own over that corner. And we don't know how long these buildings lasted for, but they were certainly made of wood. They had probably wattle sides, so made of hurdles, which suggests there's enough plant material around for you to build that. And then they had heather roofs, ling roofs. And the problem with ling is that it catches fire. And at least one of these buildings caught fire. And we know there were 3 of them, and we're not quite sure of the dates. So clearly this is a community that can build as well. It's not, we're not just turning up with our camping kit. We feel that we're going to stay for long enough, we will build a place. And even if we leave it for a while, we can come back and we can re-roof it on another occasion. So it's would have been quite noticeable, I suppose, in the winter, when all the grass had gone down. Come the summer, it would have disappeared. But at least you would have known where you're coming back to and where your garden was. And because you've got this community, the other thing you have to remember is that you've got a community that is manuring your earth. And that's important. At the present moment, we've got farmers going out, they're pouring nitrogen on all the fields. In those days, you had a midden.
You had
a midden.
A midden.
And that's where you put your night soil, all of your night soil, because that would all go on the earth, all of your animals' night soil, and all your green matter. So you're composting your earth, you're making sure that it's good, so you might not need it this year, because you might only take one crop of it, but next year your earth has been manured.